Okay, I'm eating food, so I watch video.
To legends.
Let's go.
If you were alive in the year 2017, and according to my viewer demographics, everyone who's currently watching this video was, you would have seen a phenomenon sweep through YouTube, the likes of which the gaming world had never seen. The most unlikeliest of games, a game that by any common sense metric should not be popular, somehow took the internet by storm. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy isn't your typical game. The goal is simply enough to understand, just climb the mountain and launch yourself into space, but the controls are so unintuitive and unique that within mere minutes, a pure sense of frustration begins to eat away at one's sanity. However, sometimes it's a game like Getting Over It that can spread like wildfire exactly because it's so difficult and frustrating. And in this case, that's what happened. In late 2017, every big name on YouTube was playing Getting Over It. Rage compilations sprung up in droves, highlighting how unforgiving the game is. It was everywhere. If you were a variety streamer in that era, chances are you played Getting Over It. Maybe you didn't beat it, but you almost certainly joined in on the meme. And alongside the explosion of popularity from variety streamers came the speedrunners. And it's obvious why. A game this difficult is prime territory to show off just how much of a true gamer you really are. Thus, Getting Over It speedruns became, and still are, some of the most popular speedruns ever viewed. For example, take a channel like IGN, a channel with 17.4 million subscribers. IGN covers everything. Trailers, reviews, news, and bizarrely, its sixth most popular viewed video ever is a random speedrun of Getting Over It with 35 million views. And while Getting Over It may have long left the gaming zeitgeist, speedrunners never really got over it. They continued advancing their skills and pushing the game, and for the past several years, a single barrier has been staring them in the face, teasing, taunting, begging them to overcome it. The barrier of reaching the top and beating the game in less than 60 seconds. A single minute. Since 2020, the community has only been a mere handful of seconds away, but those final few seconds seemed harder to overcome than the minutes they had conquered in the years prior. Yet, they never gave up. And after thousands and thousands of hours of grinding, in April of 2023, the player Blastbolt made history when he became the first person to beat Getting Over It in just 59 seconds. This run is one of the most beautiful speedruns in history, and especially more so if you've ever actually tried to play the game. But in any case, it's a monumental achievement. In this video, we are going to take a quick look at Getting Over It speedruns, what makes them so difficult to perfect, and why this latest run is a pure work of art. I really hope you enjoy. Now legends, this video is sponsored by the amazing MMORPG Dragon Raja. Dragon Raja is undoubtedly one of the best MMORPGs. The 12th of January 2018, the speedrunner Distortion 2 would become the first person to beat Getting Over It in less than 2 minutes, with a time of 1:56. And that's really where this particular story begins, because while this was only a few months after the game's release, this was the last time a minute barrier had been broken in this game until just a few weeks ago. It took 3 months to take the record from 8 minutes down to below 2 minutes, and then over 5 years to go down 1 more minute. It's both fascinating but also not surprising that it was Distortion 2 that was the first person to go below 2 minutes and achieve this world record. Distortion 2 is easily one of the greatest speedrunners of all time, but in a different way than I usually cover. Generally, I talk about players who are so good at a particular game and dominate that game for so long that it makes them great. However, Distortion 2 is a bit different. If a new popular game comes out and you aren't betting on Distortion 2 to achieve a new world record on it, you simply don't understand the history of speedrunning. and his achievements span every genre. He achieved the world record in the biggest shooters, the biggest action role-playing games, the biggest horror games, and also random indie games. But getting over it is its own beast completely, which in my opinion makes this sub 2-minute run one of the most impressive notches Distortion 2 has on his belt. When you watch these early world record runs, while they may have been the fastest ever performed at the time, you can still sense the struggle. The difficulty in the movement is so self-evident that movement in of itself appears labored and mentally taxing. The runs are littered with mistakes and missed hammer strikes, and there's a reason that movement looks so difficult, even in the best runs ever, and that's because it is. The challenge of getting over it is purely about mastering the movement, and if you do compare a speedrun from 2018 to 2023, you'll notice the route the players take to get to the top is essentially the same. Strategies haven't really changed. What has changed is how good players are at controlling the character. A great example of how this manifests in runs is a very steep icy section on the mountain. This always stuck out to me because it just seems so hard for players to climb this section quickly, even in world records. And when we compare older runs to current runs, we can see how much of a difference better control makes. After Distortion's sub 2, Luminant came back rather quickly with his own 144, 12 seconds ahead of Distortion, which is a massive difference. And yet, still in this difficult section of terrain, you can see just how much trouble he still had trying to scale it quickly. If you look at a relatively recent run from the current champion, Blast Bolt, it's a night and day difference. It's much smoother and much quicker. But this isn't necessarily a difference of strategy. This is a difference of skill and technique. Something that only comes after thousands of hours. Over the years, players simply got faster, made less mistakes, became more accurate, and because of this, were able to maintain much more momentum throughout the run. Having better control did allow one shift in the game's meta, one tweak that I would consider an actual change in strategy that had a huge impact on the game. Around the years 2019 to 2020, some players had invested so much time in the game, by this point probably even thousands of hours, that their control started to get incredibly precise. Up until this point, just navigating up the terrain without any major mistakes would be considered a success, and the primary goal. But once you get enough control, you can start to plan the smaller details. Before this point, there really wasn't any use planning smaller details because players just weren't good enough to consistently do them anyway. But now, players were taking a much closer look at the specific techniques they were using and trying to find more optimal ways of movement. And it's around this time there was a change away from what players had been doing since the beginning, which is a technique called spinning. And there was a shift towards a new type of movement called tapping. And this single change may be the most impactful awakening in the game's history. So what exactly is spinning and what is tapping? In order to illustrate the difference, we can again compare an earlier run to a later run. And one of the best places to demonstrate this is the very start of the run. In 2018, one particularly popular runner was Loch Ness, who achieved a 124 in August of 2018. Using slow motion, we can see that at the beginning of the run, he has a very particular technique which involves large arching motions of the hammer. This is where he fully extends his arms and does a sweeping motion. Every time he jumps, you can see him extend the hammer and do a giant swing. This sweeping action is called spinning. Now, let's look at a much more recent run by Blast Bolt, achieved late last year. In his initial movement, there is no sweeping outwards at all. Instead, he keeps the head of the hammer close to his body and performs either a pushing or tapping motion. This change in technique becomes more obvious at a section later on at the top of the church. Here, going back to Loch Ness's run, he simply wants to get from the tip of the church to the rock next to it. And still, he does a large outward swinging motion after pushing off the top of the church, and then again after pushing off the rock. This causes him to lob himself into the air in a slow arc. But Blast Bolt uses tapping, and again he keeps the head of the hammer close to his cauldron and simply performs 2 quick taps, which ultimately ends up being much faster. This newer tapping technique is much more optimal, and because the hammer movement is so much quicker, it allows you to push off more times from the terrain, keeping your momentum. And you have much more options with which direction you want to push or pull, which again allows you to create forces that already align with your current movement angle. So the question arises, if tapping is so much faster than the large spins players used to do, why did players do them in the first place? The answer is that tapping is extremely hard to do and requires extreme precision. It's almost impossible to explain why it's difficult, because the controls in getting over it are so unique that words can't really even do them justice. But ultimately, every single variable plays a part. How the character holds the hammer, whether he is holding it close or far away, how fast he is moving, how fast he moves the hammer, his angle of momentum, all affects how the hammer interacts with the environment. And it takes so many thousands of hours of practice to do tapping that it just didn't exist previously because players couldn't do it. Spinning, on the other hand, or the act of extending your arms fully outwards, essentially resets every single hammer movement and allows you to do it from the same position every time. If every time you try to jump, it's from an arms extended and outward position, movement becomes much more predictable. This makes it easier, which is why earlier players defaulted to using this technique. But over the years, certain players did lead the way in spinning less and tapping more. Players like Mojita, Stillo, Crumpet, and Baracco Business all helped in pushing the technique forward. Spinning is still used when possible, for example when there is a large jump and plenty of time anyway, but the best players use tapping as much as possible, and generally the faster the run, the more tapping is involved. Nothing better illustrates this than the current TAS, which just shows that spinning is almost not used at all. It's almost entirely done using tapping. And really, this is the story of getting over it. There were no game-breaking route changes, no unbelievable discoveries that changed everything. It's been a slow, steady progression of skill by the top players. And nothing better illustrates this than the graph of the world record progression. At the end of 2018, the progression flatlined, and it's been nothing but power of will, patience, determination, and mountains upon mountains of practice, no pun intended, that has caused this world record to go lower. Yes, players still study the finer details, trying to figure out different ways to squeeze water from a stone, but all of that ends up being meaningless without the skill to actually do it. And getting over it is in the uppermost echelon of games where skill is king, and humans are still far from attaining what is humanly possible. Since September of 2019, the game has more or less been dominated by a single player, Blast Bolt, who achieved his first world record with a 1:14, and has since held the world record for most of the last several years and has steadily lowered it. By early 2021, the record sat at 1 minute and 5 seconds, just 5 seconds away from the final barrier. This doesn't seem like a big distance, and yet it still took years to dwindle this tiny distance down. Despite Blast Bolt's dominance, there were some other noteworthy world records by other players, like a 1:02 by Yeet1 in September of 2021, and a 1-minute flat by Galaxy in March of 2023. Honestly, at the very end, there were several people who could have been the one to achieve the first sub-1 minute run. But given his domination for so long, it did seem like fate that Blast Bolt would ultimately be the chosen one. And the run is so short that there really is no reason for us not to just sit back and marvel in the beauty of its entire glory. For many years, people weren't even sure if this would ever happen, and it will never happen again. On the 2nd of April 2023, Blast Bolt broke the final minute barrier in getting over it and achieved this run.
Dedicate this run to you.
When you compare this run to earlier runs in history, you can really see just how much the technique has improved. It really is a work of art, and trying to find out where it was slow would just ruin it, in my opinion. If you truly are interested in either learning to speedrun the game or wanting to know some of the more finer details, I would suggest joining the Getting Over It Speedrun Discord, which I will put a link to in the description. A huge congratulations to Blast Bolt for being the first person to beat Getting Over It in less than 1 minute. I do think this achievement deserves much more attention than it's received so far. I really hope this video has allowed you to appreciate Getting Over It speedruns just that little bit more, and I hope you've learned something along the way. Thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.
Yeah, nice.
it's okay, I already love. I already love. I loved you.